and I believe we are quorate. I'm advised that we are quorate and we can begin the meeting. We'll just wait one moment for the broadcast. Okay. Good afternoon all, a very warm welcome to you all. This is the Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19 of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. My name is Mireille Wenger, I'm the chairperson of this committee. We welcome all the members in attendance as well as officials from the WCPP as well as our procedural officers. We have received 2 apologies for today, one from Honourable Botha and one from Honourable Christians. Are there any other apologies received today? None. Just an indication, are there any alternates standing in for permanent members? None? All right. Just in terms of rules of virtual meetings, all members were muted at the beginning of the meeting, and this is to avoid background noise. Please be informed that this is the procedure. If members have any points of order, please would you use the raise hand function, which you will find on your toolbar in the middle of the screen. If you're on a mobile app, please use the chat function to raise any points of order. And please keep the chat free from chat. It should be used for points of order only, please. We also ask that video and audio should be switched off to improve the quality of the connection. However, if a member, official, or minister, as the case may be, is speaking, please do put on your mic and video. And if you then turn those off once you've finished speaking. Then the directives for the sitting of the House and meetings of committees by electronic means was ATC'd on Friday the 17th of April, and which govern these meetings. Okay, we have the Public Outreach Department of the WCPP joining us today. In the latter part of our conversation, we will welcome and introduce them at that point, but please do feel welcome to our meeting today. Members, today we were supposed to have a meeting on citizen surveillance. I can report back that we sent follow-up invitations to the Minister and Department of Health, the National. The Minister of Health sent an apology, and then we were informed that a new DG is now responsible for the National Department of Health, and they started on Monday. And we received a note yesterday that, for obvious reasons, that person was not able to come and brief our committee. In terms of Home Affairs, we received a letter from the DG of Home Affairs on Monday indicating that Home Affairs, in fact, has no role to play in the maintenance of the database for citizen surveillance during the COVID pandemic. So therefore, it was not necessary for them to come to brief the committee either. So at least we have clarity now. And I'd like to then propose that we send a third letter of invitation to the Department of Health, that they come and present to this committee on our return from our constituency period on either the 15th of July or the meeting thereafter, that we can be briefed on those questions that we had relating to citizen surveillance. Could we proceed in that way?
Chairperson?
Yes, Honourable Philander.
I support the resubmission of the invite to the Department of Health.
Thank you. It is one of our themes, and it is the theme that we have not been able to deal with yet. But at least we now have clarity on who the role players are. That would be namely the National Health Department, and with 1 month's notice and a third invitation, I'm sure that they will be able to come and answer our questions. Honourable Murray, I see you.
Chair, I just didn't get what you said now about the letter to the Ministry of Health. Is it the 15th of July or 15th of June? That they should meet with us?
The proposal is that they come and brief us on the 15th of July on the issue of citizen surveillance.
I would consider that to be very late, 15th of July. Why not this month? Why July only?
Honourable Member, we have one ad hoc committee meeting next week, and we have quite a full programme. We have the Department of Health Provincial Department of Health coming to brief us, as well as all the committee reports that we need to finalise. Thereafter, we have a few weeks of constituency period where we'll be working in our constituencies, and usually in those constituency periods, committees, there aren't standing committees. So therefore, if we look at the earliest possible date thereafter, that will put us at the 15th of July.
May I address you again, Chair?
Yes, Honourable Member.
I asked this question in the light of the Gauteng Court ruling regarding the validity and unconstitutionality of all the regulations issued by ministers, and that they didn't have the right to issue such regulations because only Minister Zuma has that authority. She can't delegate it. This has massive implications for all sections, all ministries, and I think we should treat this as a matter of urgency. It means that we can go our own way and we don't have to observe any of the regulations in terms of that court order. So I would have thought we would want to get clarity from the Ministry of Health way before the 15th of July.
Well, as you know, Honourable Member, we have tried for several weeks now to get the Health Department to come and brief us on this. We will have to pose additional questions on what this means for citizen surveillance in the first place if those regulations were deemed to be unconstitutional. And I'm not sure if those are specifically mentioned in the judgment, but those are all the questions that we do have to understand. We could approach it in other ways. Instead of having a briefing, we could ask for a written report. But certainly from my side, I would prefer to have an engagement with the National Health Department so that if we have follow-up questions and what have you, we do have that space to do so. Honourable Bartman.
Chair, I just wanted to second the support from Honourable Philander. I wasn't sure if he needed a seconder.
Thank you. Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. And I have to say, I also share the same concerns as Member Marais. However, the court judgment did say that they're giving the department 14 days, I think 14 business days, to come up with new regulations or alternative regulations that is rational. Notwithstanding that, I do think it's important that we do need to hear, particularly on citizen surveillance, because that is an important matter. And given the irrationality and unconstitutionally by the court judgment yesterday, it's important that we do know what's happening. And what I'd like to ask you, if one can also not then write to the Director General in the President's office, including the State Security Agency, because they are the one with the technology that are monitoring citizen surveillance, although health job is to do contact tracing. I doubt the Department of Health has that kind of technology to do it with other backing of our state security agencies, and I would really like to make that proposal as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Honourable Mackenzie. My understanding is, though, that it is the Health Department that is the is responsible for the database for contact tracing, and in fact, those regulations at the time gave that responsibility to them, and it did not include the State Security Agency. That would be a separate issue, which is also why I think we do need to have this conversation with the Health Department to understand, what role is played by other departments, if any, but my understanding is that it is their role and function to hold the database. Yeah, we would need to have further conversation on that. Honourable Heron.
Thanks, Chairperson. I want to understand, when we're talking about the 15th of July, are we including the Provincial Health Department in the briefing if we're going to get the full picture on contact tracing? Because while the National Health Department may hold the database, the implementation of asking those who test positive to identify their contacts is the frontline staff of either the Provincial Health Department or their community health workers who are out in the field. So I think there's, from my understanding and my engaging with healthcare workers, there seems to be a failure at that point as well of asking positive cases to identify their contacts. And that would not be the National Health Department that needs to do that.
Okay. So this is a different, this is slightly different in that it is a database that's being created by the National Health Department that allows them to require cell phone companies to trace citizens' movements if a citizen is suspected of being a carrier of the virus. So the questions then relate to that database. How are citizens identified? What happens to that information? Citizens are supposed to be informed about 6 weeks after they're being surveilled. Do we know what safety measures are in place for those databases to protect their privacy and so on and so forth? So it's that element of it, of the surveillance of citizens, which my understanding is the responsibility of the National Health Department. Certainly, there may be many more questions that come out of that, and from there we can look at, what other departments are involved. But the citizen surveillance theme is relating to that particular element of it. I see 3 hands: Honourable Murray, Mackenzie, then Dugmore.
Chair Lady, thank you so much. I think we got to just stop here and stand still for a minute and ask ourselves, what did this court judgment actually say? And I know that they've been given 14 days, and in terms of that 14 days period, the present regulations I expect will still be in force, but it can be challenged after the fact. Because they said the words used by the court is very, very, very serious words. It's a serious indictment against how government has handled this whole issue of issuing regulations. People now say, can we sue the government for loss of earnings? People say, I've been arrested for being on the streets. And now that it's not valid, all these regulations, the lock-in, etc., what flows from there, can I see a redress of my grievances against the state? We don't know where we are at the moment, and I think it is time that the president come clear with the country, and we should demand, because our own premier has said the children will go to school. He acts as if we're in level 3 already, but we're still in level 4, basically, in the hotspots. We don't know what advice to give our people. What do I tell them? That the government don't know what they're doing? That they govern unconstitutionally? We need clarity on this, and having meetings on Zoom and having YouTube listen in and people, we're just confusing them even more. We don't know what we are supposed to do, whether businesses are supposed to open, and whether movement of people are in fact legally being constrained.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. My understanding is, you raised some very good points, but my understanding is that for at least the next 2 weeks, the current regulations remain in place until there is an amended version of them. Hopefully more communication will be forthcoming from then. But I do take your point. Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, if you just one step back quickly, if you look at the cell phone companies, obviously the MTNs, the Vodacom, and all these, they are regulated under the Department of Communications, or still suspended Minister Stella Benny. I'm not sure if she's back at work or not. And although the database itself will be managed by health, because they put in the information who's been tested, who has not, but I'm sure that the interaction or the communication with the cell phone companies, if my understanding is correct, and in fact my understanding is correct, that the regulations that was released at the time was the Minister of Communications at the time, who obviously is the custodian of or the regulator, if you like, of mobile companies, was dealing with them, and which is why I'm actually that the Department of Health has not sent anyone. Yes, we respect the fact that the DG started only on Monday, but there's been people working there for the last few months, at least, on COVID since the 26th of March, since the hard lockdown. So yes, we can obviously wait for him to settle in, but I do think that we need to broaden the individuals that we ask, because citizen surveillance is also not about just contact tracing on its own. It's about citizen surveillance. What is the government doing with this information? When I went for my COVID testing results, rightfully I listed all my contacts who have been in contact. Fortunately, I was negative. But what do they then do with that information? Is it just stored? Who is securing that information? The Department of Health, and I'm going to repeat, do not have the capacity or the technology, given what we know about them, to safeguard hardly anything, not even government physical buildings. How are they going to safeguard our personal information? So I do think that state security or the Department of Communication has to at some point come to this meeting as well. And I'll close on that matter from my end. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Dagmore.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chairperson, apologies for joining the meeting late, but could I just firstly request that when the National Department of Health comes to the ad hoc committee, that we also invite the Provincial Health Department, so that the issues raised by Member Heron, which clearly need to be linked to the whole question of how, the information is managed and stored so that it can be used effectively, I think would help. So I would like to make that proposal. Secondly, when it comes to the recent judgment, I would agree with what the concerns raised by Member Mareb, but I do think the Chief Whip has explained that there is a 2-week period that the current regulations apply, and that I think what would be useful, as I understand the process of any regulations being drafted, that this committee, individual members of Parliament and the community are able to make submissions to the National Command Council to influence and to make proposals in regard to those regulations. And I think it would be important at our next meeting to actually have a discussion about that. Hopefully, if we do meet before the 14-day period is over. I think the other issue raised by Member Murray, I mean, the reality is that the national government has, in regard to schools, asked that, and I believe the proclamation has now been issued, that schools go back on the 8th. But the reality is that what has always been maintained, as far as my understanding goes, is that if a school does still not feel that they are ready, or if individual parents opt for keeping their children at home, they have every right to do so. So I think that in regard to the decision by the MEC in this province that schools go back as of Monday, whatever one thinks about that particular view, we can communicate a message that if parents or if the school governing body of a school does not feel ready to go back. I was, for instance, engaged by the teachers of Athlone High, who very specifically, after consultation with their parent community, decided to follow the national approach and are trying to be ready by Monday the 8th. So, Chair, I would just suggest in regard to this matter, we should not only involve the Provincial Health Department in that meeting, but also look at who else would add value to that discussion. Thanks.
Honourable Nkondlo, and then Honourable Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairperson. I would want us to consider. I think what exactly are we seeking with this particular information on citizen surveillance, and support the notion that says we would need to have the information of the department, which is health at this point, that is collating the information, because I think the subsequent and other underlying players in the space can then be explained during that time, so that we don't already start making, assumptions, about who else. For me, I would think that it is important for us to get the Department of Health, and I support the notion that says also those that are implementing, so that we understand the entire network and how it operates, on understanding the whole question of citizen surveillance. So I would think at this point, even if in terms of trying to expedite that, as you indicated, Chairperson, that we may ask for that written, but I would still support the notion that says the engagement is going to be far better, because then we can be able to interact and ask questions. The second point, Chair, would say, given, I think, the judgment that has been raised, once again, fortunately, in Parliament, we also do have legal support, and perhaps as we await, because we did receive, and I think we did hear that also Cabinet is studying the judgment and soon will be indicating to the public what it means and what is it that they are going to do, including the 14-day period, which also then can open up the judgment to it being appealable. So I would think perhaps in the meantime, in trying just for ourselves, to understand what it means, we may request our own legal unit to actually draft an opinion that indicates to us what is the implication of the judgment, perhaps as part of trying for us to have a deeper, appreciation of what it means as we await, I think, this period of 14 days. I wanted just to make that suggestion, so that I think the concerns being raised by Member Murray, and the fact that obviously when a judgment is out there, everybody would want to understand now, what do we do? How do we act? Do we implement? But the issue now is that, like any other judgment, that particular judgment, until that point, it will, the current regulation still remains. But I would think it would be of value for us to ask maybe our legal to just draw for us, which we can share, and understand deeper the implications thereof from a legal point of view. I wanted just to make that suggestion, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Honourable Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I want to firstly say that I agree with some of the issues raised by Honourable Murray, and Honourable Nkondlo in her last part of her contribution stated what I wanted to propose, but I want to take that further and officially propose that with regards to the 14 days that government have to study the court judgment or bring in new amended regulations, that although we are going into a constituency period, that we convene this meeting of the ad hoc committee with the concurrence of the programming authority, obviously, and that we invite government to present to the committee on how they have dealt with the amendments or the whatever comes out of the 14 days, and that the citizen surveillance part of this committee then be moved till after the constituency period, so that we don't wait till after constituency before we get that feedback as proposed by Honourable Murray, but that we do it in the constituency break, if it's okay with all the members of this committee. So I want to officially put that as a proposal for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Mitchell. Okay, so we have 3 proposals, but before we go to that, I just would like, especially for the benefit of those members of this committee that weren't in attendance in the last meeting or 2, so that we're very clear on what the ask is. I'm going to ask the procedural officer, Ms. Adams, are you able to put the letter to the Department of Health to share it on the screen?
Hi, Chair. Yes, I'm just waiting for Wasima Mwesa. She's assisting.
Okay, So we've looked at the regulations, and initially it was the Departments of Communications and Health, National Departments of Communication and Health, that were responsible for the citizen surveillance as it relates to COVID-19. We then invited both departments, Health and Communications. Communications responded to say that they are no longer responsible for it because there was a subsequent regulation in early May which removed responsibility from the Department of Communications. We then were set out to try and find out which other departments are involved in citizen surveillance as it relates to COVID-19. We were then told that Home Affairs was involved, which is why we sent letters to Home Affairs. But Home Affairs has now confirmed that they are not involved in the management of this database and citizen surveillance for COVID-19, and that it is only the Department of Health, the National Department of Health. We have now sent the National Department of Health 2 invitations, but with the change of DG, they're not able to come today. So therefore, we want to give them, the new DG, sufficient time in office to be able to come and brief the committee on this matter. So the briefing that we've asked is an overview of the citizen surveillance program of suspected COVID carriers, which were gazetted on the 26th of March. So it's specific to surveillance and the management of a database which is managed by National Health. So we want to know if it's operational, how is information selected for surveillance, and if it's only confined to COVID-19 carriers. We've asked how many citizens in the Western Cape are being surveilled by this program. We're asking on how confidentiality is ensured, whether there are audit trails of surveilled citizens, whether there are safeguards against hacking or unauthorized access, whether they're using artificial intelligence, and then we're asking for the costs and the maintenance of the database. We can go down to the next page. And then whether they have, in fact, as per the regulations, directed telecommunication providers to provide the location of movement of any person in the Western Cape, and to get an idea of how many those are. And then whether this has been reported to the judge overseeing tracking and tracing in each case within 1 week, as required by the regulations, and whether any recommendations have been regarding privacy have been made by the judge. We're also asking which provincial governments have been given information from this program for the purpose of tracking and tracing, and whether the Western Cape government has been provided with information from this program. So, okay, we can unshare. So that gives you an idea of this particular theme and the inputs received on it, which is why this was asked for in that meeting. Okay, so with that as context on what we'd like to deal with in that particular meeting, we've had several proposals, some concerning citizen surveillance itself and others relating to the regulations themselves that have been raised by several members. And I think we should try and separate them. So from what I can, if I recall correctly, we have 3 proposals, which I'd like to put to the committee. The first is from Honourable Nkondlo, who recommended that we get a note from our legal department on what the implications of yesterday's judgments are. So let's deal with that one first. Are there any supporters or objections to a recommendation that we ask for a note from our legal department on the implications of this judgment?
No objection.
Okay.
I just would like to know what will be the benefit we can derive from an opinion of our own legal department if there's a court ruling on the matter. I can't understand somebody's, who's talking there now? Pat Lecker, is she talking?
I see she's just muted.
I apologize.
I would just like to know if there is a court judgment and there's 14 days for reply or responding by the minister, of what benefit is a provincial legal opinion on this? I don't see the sense. From a legal point of view, how's it going to help?
All right, Honourable Murray, it's not a legal opinion, it's a note from legal so that we understand what does this mean. So the note will then guide us on what next steps government is required to take and by when. So we understand what comes next. We might not have we obviously won't have the content, but at least we know what the process is going forward. And that would assist all of us in understanding what it means. It would, for example, tell us by when new regulations would have to be made, will those regulations have to go back to the court, etc., etc., etc. I hope that allays any of your concerns. If I can just ask if there are any objections for us to ask our legal team to help us set out what those implications are and what that means going forward.
If that's the case, I don't have any objections.
Sorry, was that an objection, Honourable Murray?
No, I say if it's just for an opinion as to what we are able to do or not to do now until the 14 days is passed, it makes sense. Otherwise, we just sit and wait for the 14 days.
Okay, thank you. So I think that's then agreed to. So we will note that as a recommendation or a request from this committee. We then have a proposal from Honourable Mitchell that we convene a meeting of this ad hoc committee during the constituency period once the 14 days have expired so that we can understand how those amendments have been dealt with. Are there any objections to that proposal?
No.
No objections. Okay, I will make the request then to the Programming Authority. All right. Then there was a third proposal, again from Honourable Mitchell, that the theme then of citizen surveillance, as I've described a short while ago, that we then make those invitations for July for after the constituency period. Are there any objections to that? None. Thank you very much. We will then record that as a recommendation of the committee. Right. I then see two hands. I'm now going to recognise Honourable Nkondlo.
No, Sir Chair, I didn't lower my hand. Okay. Apologies.
Thank you. Honourable Lecker. Honourable Lecker, your hand is raised. Did you want to raise something?
Thank you, Chairperson. I actually wanted to raise the same sentiments that Member Nkondlo raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
So I agree with what she said. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Heron.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that there was another proposal. I made it and then I think Honourable Dugmore made it. The point is about, I mean, it's all very well understanding the implementation of citizen surveillance, but the purpose of it is to allow the health authorities to track and trace contacts. And I mean, if we don't include the Western Cape Provincial Health Department, we're not going to get a full picture on how successful this whole process is. So there was a proposal that we also include the Provincial Health Department, and I didn't hear it in your three summaries. And I'd like us to, I mean, I raised it in the speakers forum that events are happening and we're sticking to a program that doesn't have much flexibility. And I think we're at the point now where we're seeing that the country's moving into contact tracing as part of the pandemic management. And so just to get the citizen surveillance information without how it is being implemented by health authorities is not very helpful in trying to understand the containment part of our work. So I'm asking what happened to that proposal. Thank you.
Apologies, Honourable Heron. Okay, so the thing is, we don't even know if this database is operational at all, which is why we need the National Health Department to come and tell us what's happening there. We do have the Provincial Health Department coming to brief us next week, in which contact tracing will be a part of that meeting. So can we then have, park that until next week to see if your concerns are adequately dealt with next week in our meeting? And if not, we can again add it to the meeting of July. In any way, we will need to have a briefing from the health department after the constituency period, because we need to understand what the health responses are at that point in time. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that the health department was coming back again next week.
Yes.
And is contact tracing on the agenda, or if it's not, can we ask them to address us on that? Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Honourable Murray.
Thank you. I always would like to add, it should have been actually added to the first motion. The court order also says that in summing up, that certain of the functions and powers that the national minister has taken over, she was not allowed to interfere because they were provincial or local government functions, especially in terms of licensing. And I want to know, to what extent can we then move on and move forward in drafting our own regulations, whether at level of provincial or local government, to nullify whatever the minister has done, because they interfered in powers which is not their powers in the first place. And that's also in the summing up of the judge.
Thank you, Honourable Murray. How would you propose we move forward on that proposal?
I would like that we recommend that we be given a full briefing to what extent the regulations interfered with powers either given in terms of Schedule 4 or 5 to provinces and municipalities, which they have no legal right to interfere with, and that we can draft our own recommendations on how we're going to manage COVID-19 in respect of those powers, especially SMMEs and licensing of small businesses.
Honourable Murray, could I then propose that we have a look at that particular element when we convene after 14 days?
Well, we've waited so long, so might as well wait another 14 days. But as long as it is minuted that we need to find out to what extent they overstep their legal constitutional authority to interfere in provincial affairs.
So that's then an amendment to the proposal. The proposal by Honourable Mitchell that we convene an ad hoc committee during the constituency period once the 14 days have expired to understand the amendments to the regulations and the judgment and what follows from there. Then there is a proposal that we amend that and include in that meeting a presentation on how the regulations interfered with other spheres, powers and functions. Are there any objections to us doing that?
No objections.
No.
Okay. Thank you. We will then note that. I then see Honourable Dugmore.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now, I think your response to Member Heron was the main issue that I was raising, and I would support that. And I just wanted to ask could you just give us an indication as to which day next week and at what time the Provincial Health Department is coming?
As per the programme, next week, Wednesday, in our usual committee meeting slot.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check if it's possible, since we have Department of Health again next week, that the recent announcement about testing not being done for those that are 55 years and below, can it be included so that at least we've got clarity about the matter? Because I saw it yesterday, on different media. One just needs to understand, what exactly that is, if it will be included, if it could be included for the department to just give us, more clarity on the matter, Chair. if it's not actually overburdening the agenda for next week.
Okay, we will then send a follow-up letter to the Department of Health to ask them to, because I think that is important, that just so that we have an understanding of the new testing regime as well. Okay, are there any objections to that proposal?
No.
No. Honourable Syed, and then I'm hoping we can then move on to the next agenda item. Honourable Syed.
Thank you, Chair. I think my sound was off. Sorry about that. Chair, I also want to come in on the issues around education and the reopening of schools, because we've been having many standing committee meetings on education, and we've been raising issues around the reopening and the readiness. But obviously the response we're getting from the department is that, look, and from the majority of colleagues in the committee is that, look, let's take these issues to this particular ad hoc committee. So within that context, I want to also propose that we get a briefing from the MEC and a department on the readiness for the reopening of schools on the 8th of June, and also just to explain to us what they've experienced during this week, as we know that the Western Cape went ahead with the reopening of schools. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Syed. You've actually reminded me. I did get a request from Honourable Botha, and I believe that was based on a discussion in your Standing Committee of Education. You know, next week's meeting, because we have the Health Department coming, I don't think that there is time for a briefing from the Education Department, but what we have done is asked for a report on all of the issues that you've just mentioned, and that should reach the committee by Tuesday next week. So we will be able to table that and discuss it, and then make a determination on whether we would require the department to come and brief us in person beyond that. But all of those issues we have requested in a written report, which we should receive by Tuesday, which will be before the committee on Wednesday. Okay. All right then, members, if we can then move on to our second part of the agenda, which is the discussion on the public participation process or citizen engagement on COVID-related matters. We circulated a draft program. It is a work in progress. We did have some preliminary discussions last week, and I'm hoping that we can then further that conversation today. And have a look at how we deal with the public participation process for this committee. So the thinking is to talk to various stakeholders that we haven't yet had an opportunity to engage with, and then also to publish our draft committee report and invite comments not only on the report, but also on some key questions about people's experience of this pandemic. I hope to be able to come back to you next week with a sort of more concrete proposals for that publication of the report and the questions in a format that can be advertised in the mainstream as well as social media platforms. But we have on the screen now some of the proposals for engagements with the public, again based on our themes that we've agreed upon. Before we start the discussion, I think it's important that if we could at the outset agree, in order to make this a manageable process, that we look to invite umbrella bodies or federations or formations that represent many voices within that particular area of interest, so that we're able to gain a broad understanding from largely representative bodies in whichever space that might be. Is that acceptable that we approach this, certainly for this particular moment, in that way?
you know, it's obviously a useful criteria to say that one is looking for organizations which have that kind of impact. But I think there's also a real danger that in many of the areas we've agreed to cover, there are very locally based, community-based organizations and NGOs that could give valuable feedback and comments and contributions to the committee. So I would agree with the broad approach, but I think that we also need to agree that where members come up with suggestions for particular organizations that might be directly involved, for instance, I'm looking at Joni Fredericks in Tafelsig Mitchell's Plain, who's literally feeding 6,000 people a day, and the method that she's developed in regard to cooking in each street, etc. So she's not of a broader impact, but she's a very you know, someone who's feeding in a certain way, what the projects people doing in Horston, etc. So if we could just, you know, open up a little bit. Obviously time is a big problem, and I think we need to limit inputs in which people can make so that we can also ask questions. So I agree with your broad approach, but just appeal for flexibility for really important consultations or contributions that would enrich the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Honourable Dugmore. Please forgive me, honourable members, I completely neglected. We moved on to the next item and I hadn't introduced the team that are here present. We have the WCPP Public Participation, Public Outreach Department here. So I'd like to welcome Ms. Sunel Foucher and her team. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sunel Foucher, Director of Public Engagement. I'm very happy to be here with you and hoping that we can assist you greatly in this wonderful committee and effort.
Okay. Is it only you on the line?
No. The others, Temba, James, are you guys here? You can introduce yourself.
Yes, please. My name is Temba Keswa. I'm the manager PEO at WCPP. I'm here at the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Keswa.
Good afternoon, Chairperson. James Retief, Manager, Stakeholder Management and Communication Services.
Thank you, Mr. Retief. All right, so they're here and they're joining our meeting because we're looking at public participation, so they will be able to guide us if we have any questions. They've also very kindly offered to support the committee in its public outreach efforts. Okay, so we've had a proposal, well, not a proposal, an input from Honourable Dugmore. I see two more hands. Honourable Marais, you're next.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, and welcome to Sunel Foucher, Temba Keswa, and James Retief. What is the outcomes which we expect to get from all this public engagement and outreach? What are the expected outcomes? How do we evaluate the success of this whole project which we're launching with public engagement? Is it because we want to bring them on board and finance them? Is it just because we're inquisitive to know what they're doing? Do we want to capacitate them? Are they expected to show us plans that and do we check up on them? Is there oversight over them? I'm just a bit, you know, that this is just shall I say, publicity stunt sometimes, engaging with public in municipal halls. People get up and people complain and we forget about the people. I'd like to see, where do we take it after we've consulted with these NGOs or whoever they are? Do we take them by the hand? Do we train them? Do we finance them? Do we check up on how well they're progressing? What is the purpose with the whole public engagement exercise?
Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. I wanted to say, in support of the proposal made about how the engagement should be, that we must also allow written submissions where people, in terms of, you know, participation, cannot be in attendance or make, you know, physical presentations, that we do also allow those who can actually make written submissions to these processes, so that those, like what we do during public hearings, that those can then be integrated, you know, and consolidated as part of an input from that particular sector. Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Syed.
Chair, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello. Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, I proposed in last week's session on the issue around schooling and education, that we also, in addition to calling in the school governing bodies, we also call in the unions, the teacher unions, to also engage with them. I submitted that in writing last night, I think, to the procedural officer. I just wanted to check whether that also is being tabled. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, but I want to propose that if it's not there.
Thanks. It was received, and we will get to the discussion on the actual nuts and bolts of it shortly. But I don't know why we've turned it now into a debate on a principle. But anyway, we'll continue. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, may I try to respond to Honourable Marais' question on what I believe is the purpose of the public participation process. I believe that we are undertaking this in order to determine how COVID-19 and the response from governments at various levels affected them, in order, hopefully, for our ministers and Premier, when they engage with the President and their colleagues at the national level, to convey to eventually the Command Council, you know, what the effect has been, and hopefully to also influence, be it then, I'd almost want to say, these rescue efforts, relief efforts, etc., so that these can be targeted to best effect for these entities that we want to invite. That is my understanding of why we would like the public input in terms of this committee.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Honourable Dugmore.
Sorry, Chair. Chair, I'm just on the point in regard to also the issue of the follow-up, which I think Honourable Marais was asking. I mean, our public participation unit, no doubt, are going to respond. But it would seem to me that, you know, in addition to the work that is done when you are engaging constituencies, you know, telling them about how to petition and so on, I think it would be very useful if in these different consultations that we have, we should also say, for instance, there's a food security project in Mossel Bay arising out of the COVID response. We know we've broadly got 3 pillars. We're looking at the prevention campaign, the social relief, and then the economic recovery without compromising the spread. And we could actually zoom in even, you know, to particular projects. And obviously I understand we need to write, as Member Syed has done, and make suggestions. But you see, out of those meetings, and to make this engagement useful, obviously, you know, you can inform people about making representation to the command. But I think the reality is that as we're starting to convene, you know, government is there, the provincial, national, local governments. So I think there should also be an aspect where we can advise in those discussions through the unit how do the concerns which may be raised with us, maybe they want to know, well, how do we get this food garden supported by social development, etc., what Member Marais was raising, then we are ready to practically give them advice. And if, for instance, we are focusing on a different sector, that maybe we should also be joined by, people who can sort of assist them. But I just think that what's very important is that after you've had a discussion and you've heard people's views, that how they then continue to pursue access to government or access to resources and so on. So I just think maybe it'll be interesting to hear the response from the team, but we should try and always be able to assist and advise how in a lockdown period, if you want to follow up with a project that you're busy with or an idea or a proposal, how do you do it? So that I think that's important that we leave people and explain that to them when we engage them. Thanks.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to endeavour to answer some of those queries. So the first is on why do we have public engagement? A reminder that the Constitution of the Republic under Section 118 requires that a provincial legislature must facilitate public involvement in the legislative and other processes of the legislature and its committees. So it is a basic constitutional requirement that we include public participation in our work. And as Honourable van der Westhuizen has indicated, it's very important that we hear from citizens themselves in what the experience with government and various other organisations has been, what are the major issues that residents are experiencing, and then through our work it will help us, and through that it will help us to conduct our oversight work much better as a legislature. On the question of written submissions, Honourable Nkondlo, absolutely. There's two legs to the public participation process. The one is through a series of engagements in committee based on our themes, and that's what the program before you deals with, where we're looking to, for example, understand, are private hospitals ready for COVID? What is the experience of a person who was COVID positive? What was their journey through the health system like? And so on and so forth. And then there's the part where we'll publish our report on the work of the committee to date, where we will invite written submissions from all sorts of organisations and entities. It will be also forwarded to a whole list of citizens and organisations, which I'd like to invite the committee to assist. If there are any particular organisations they'd like us to include in the database, to whom we'll send it, as well as advertising it more generally. So we will invite written submission. We'll also have the opportunity for members of the public to submit a WhatsApp or a voice note as well on the pandemic itself and their experiences. So that hopefully answers that question. Then from Honourable Dugmore on how to respond, once we have some of those voices and understand better what some of those concerns are, we are in a position to make recommendations immediately, as we have been doing. And for example, if there is a lack of information on a particular issue, using the example you cited of food gardens, we can make a recommendation as a committee that very same day that a leaflet is produced by the relevant department or provided to the committee, which we can then provide and distribute in our constituencies and so on. So we can be quite proactive in how we assist and respond as we receive these complaints. Then we'll go through the specifics shortly about the different themes. But if we can then agree into my initial proposal that we look principally at inviting umbrella bodies, federations or formations that represent large constituents, as it were, to brief the committee. However, if members have specific individuals or NGOs, for example, the NGO in Mossel Bay that's feeding 6,000 people, could I then ask, just for the purposes of managing this meeting, that members submit those examples in writing with a small little note on what it's about and what they're doing, so that we can look to include them in the overall program. Can we proceed in that way?
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay. All right.
Chair.
All right. So I see there's a whole lot of hands. Are those still up, or do you want to make additional inputs before we actually look at the broad program?
Chair.
Okay. Okay. Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. On the issue of written submissions to this committee, I would like to also propose that we write to the Minister of COGTA and ask for a written response with details on the opportunities that were created for public participation for some key sectors in the Western Cape, particularly the Western Cape economy. And I'm thinking here of tourism, the wine and the fishing industries, in determining the regulations to curb the spread of COVID-19. I'm not aware, apart from that initial weekend where people were invited to respond in email very early on in the risk adjustment strategy, that people were invited to come and formally engage with this command council or with the Minister of COGTA, etc. And I would really like us to just get a better picture of what were the opportunities, because my impression is, and I fear that quite often people have addressed them in an informal one-on-one way, where perhaps some pressure groups that were not quite representative of industries, were given an ear, and hopefully that fear of mine would be allayed by a formal response from the Minister.
Okay. Honourable Dugmore. No. Okay, all right. So we have then a proposal that we ask for a written response to the Minister of COGTA on what public participation took place in the drafting of the regulations for key areas of areas or industries of the Western Cape. Do we have? Can we agree to that? They will ask for that in writing, and then that will be included in our session on public participation for our report generally.
Agreed, Chair.
Speaker.
Agreed, Chair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I add a item?
Okay, Honourable Murray.
I'm back on the issue of provincial powers. Now, the Constitution says that anything that affects provincial powers must first go to the, what do you call it? House? What can I get the house's name now? The House of Provinces. They haven't
the NCOP.
done that. Correct, NCOP, National Council of Provinces. Now, the regulations have not been passed by the NCOP, but it's issues that affect the provincial authorities, the provincial governments. We must look much deeper into this. We are rushing over things, and it has huge implications. If, as the court says, that this is a provincial competency or local government competency, then it must go to the NCOP, where local government and provinces are present to determine it. Now, we must go deep into this, because this is a serious matter, and I plead with this committee. We need to investigate this issue, because a lot of people has been punished, and a lot of people has suffered tremendously, financially, business-wise, and otherwise, because of these regulations, and we want answers on this issue.
Thank you. We have agreed that we are going to look at that in 2 weeks' time. So we will then ask when we ask for the note from legal on the role of the NCOP in the regulations. Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Perhaps once we get that legal opinion, maybe it's one consideration. I'm not sure in our themes, Chairperson, whether did we consider governance in general, and how it has been affected by the COVID, so that we don't deal with it, in a piecemeal approach now that there is a court judgment. Perhaps this court judgment has then opened us up, to actually consider the governance model and how it has been impacted during this time. So I want to suggest that perhaps when we consider that a legal opinion, if we have not necessarily had a theme on this specific matter, perhaps we may, as a committee, consider adding that theme, and as the process has been, allow members to submit issues in as far as that theme is concerned, and then we start, in a much more systematic way, consider these issues of the implications of governance, across the three spheres and tiers of government and how they are implicated, because I think everybody knows globally that actually how COVID has impacted, the order of doing things across. So it obviously governance even of the state and the various facets thereof would have been impacted. So I would just want to make that suggestion that maybe we add that particular theme and we deal with it in a much more systematic way, so that we can be able to pick up these issues and raise them, and get answers from the various departments, including how you would think a local government in this particular has been affected in terms of their own powers that are drawn from the same constitution you are referring to. Thank you, Chair.
All right, so if members would like to make inputs on what Honourable Nkondlo has described, which fits in with the meeting that we will call after the 14 days have expired, members, if you would please submit those in writing to the procedural officer, and we will include it in that meeting. Thank you. All right, now we're now going to look at the draft program itself. I just have to respond to Honourable Syed on the unions, but I'll do that in due course. So the first is on the theme of health readiness. So we're looking at a briefing by the private hospitals on their readiness for COVID, or maybe perhaps not readiness, but responses, because by the time we'll speak to them and we'll be in the peak. Then the proposal is to have an engagement with a survivor of the virus and their journey through the health system, and then engagement with the hospital facility boards. We're then looking at the theme of protection of the vulnerable, and we're looking at the umbrella bodies of elderly homes as well as homes for people with disabilities, where we know that if there is an infection, that it tends to spread very rapidly. And then also to speak to the Department of Social Development that recently released some guidelines on the prevention and management of infections in long-term care facilities. Then moving forward. Okay, next page. We're looking at an engagement with independent schools as the umbrella body for private schools, and how they're dealing with the pandemic and ensuring the safety of their learners and teachers, and then an engagement with school governing body associations. Honourable Syed had put in a proposal that we include the RCL in this meeting. So I don't know how members feel about that. I do know, however, that school governing bodies have voices from learners, from parents, and the schools themselves. So we would have those three voices through the engagement with school governing body associations. I'm not sure if that would cover it. And then moving down, I just want to get through the whole program, and then we will discuss economic recovery support and livelihoods. We're looking at the briefing by the Chambers of Commerce, which is again the overarching body that represents business. This point number 2, what I thought is we could have an engagement regarding labour relations, and then invite the umbrella or federation of federations of union representatives that look at or that represent members both in health and education and the provincial government as a whole. Then we'd be looking at public hearings based on the inputs that we receive from stakeholders and organizations. We would have a pre-meeting before to have a look at the grid on what we'd received, whether there were full written submissions or whether there were comments, voice notes, etc. And depending on what we receive from members of the public, we would proceed on that. Going down, I don't think there's any more. Is there more? I think there's one more. Oh, and then that's basically, where we kind of review what we've done and what more we need to do, and if we have any voices missing or we need to delve into something in more detail. So that then is the draft broad proposal for who we would be speaking to in presentations. Of course, the public hearings might be several days, it might be one day. We can't really preempt that because it all depends on what kind of response we get from residents in the province. We'd only be able to make that call once we'd actually heard back from everyone. The thinking is to put out adverts and publish our report week after next, so that there'd be a full month opportunity for residents of the province to have their say, as it were. Okay, so with that as the broad framework for public engagement, are there any comments? Also, just a reminder that if there are particular examples outside of umbrella bodies, federations or formations, that members will submit those in an email so we can see how we include them in the program. All right. Any further inputs from members then? None. All right. So is everyone happy with that then?
Yes, Chairperson.
Excellent.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Oh, apologies. I had Honourable Botha did tender her apology today, but she did send a special request. She asked if we could include in our program somewhere where we look at the overarching or umbrella body for organisations that assist with bereavement and counselling. As we know, because of the nature of the virus, many people are not able to say goodbye to their loved ones, and funerals are limited, given that the the virus could easily spread at those occasions, and it does cause a lot of trauma for the families and loved ones of those that have succumbed to the virus. So her proposal is that we have a look at the extent of counselling and bereavement in those cases. Would the committee agree that we could include that somewhere in our program?
Yes, support that.
Certainly, yes.
Support.
Thank you. Then I have a hand from Honourable Nkondlo and Honourable Dugmore.
No. No hand, Chair, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is that from earlier? Okay. Honourable Dugmore and then Honourable Mackenzie.
No, thank you very much, Chair. I'm just thinking that in regard to, this program that we've agreed on by the ad hoc committee, there's a lot of other committees that are also meeting, and I'm sure this is going to be like quite a heavy burden to specifically do all of this as this ad hoc committee. But obviously, this ad hoc committee is there specifically for COVID-19. And, I think that an organizing reference for us is to try and, engage on the themes of the three pillars, the whole issue of prevention and awareness, because I think all of us know that on the ground, the actual social distancing and many other issues are in some cases at level 1, even though we haven't got there. And then social relief, which is, people's experiences of food parcels, soup kitchens starting to grow food, and then obviously the economic recovery, which, provided it doesn't impact on the issue of prevention, that's business, it's labor, it's many people, as Honourable Marais has said, who are facing serious income. And I think the issue of the tourism sector, the performing arts and so on, who are really being hit very hard at the moment. So I think, my understanding is that we're going to try and make suggestions and all of that. But all I'm trying to raise is that the other committees, I don't know if the public participation unit can respond to that. Say if I'm serving on Department of the Premier and they want to do like a public consultation, I don't want to undermine in any way, the initiative of the ad hoc committee. I think it's a commendable one, but are they also open if, for instance, the other committees want to have a specific engagement with the public? Do they have the capacity to help other committees besides the main one now on COVID, which is this committee?
Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, when we invite the body on burials and funerals, can we consider to invite the relevant authority, I presume, because the City of Cape Town is the metro, and perhaps I know that Minister Maree is also dealing with that matter, to that same meeting, so we can just hear from both sides. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Maree.
Thank you, Chair Lady. I'm very encouraged by the consensus, the bipartisanship that's developing in this ad hoc committee. It really pleases me. The main actor in this whole saga should be the Premier. Where's he? Why don't we invite him to tell us what he and his cabinet are doing in the meantime? Or are we going to wait for 14 days? Or are we going to ask him to say what is their position now? We are supposed to keep them to account. We're oversight committee. I would like to see the Premier at our next meeting.
Honourable Mackenzie, is that you again? No.
Chairperson, I'll allow you to respond. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And then Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I'm okay with this program. The issue I wanted to raise is at two levels. One is that in as far as considering the effort that we have made of trying to oversight the COVID-19, I'm not sure whether we have discussed how we will monitor and assess the impact that we have made in helping, because all of this effort is to try as the legislative arm to support the work done by the executive and communities to flatten the curve. Now, for me, I'm not sure whether have we actually set up a mechanism that will then consider how the various things that we've been asking, the various questions, that have been answered or not answered, have actually helped realize that. So I think that's the M&E function that I think we need to consider. The second one, Chair, is that we know as we speak, we've got areas that are hotspots here in the province, which I think are a nightmare of everyone, to try and manage. Now, I wanted to check in this particular process, how do we, especially this public engagement, how do we isolate those particular areas and try and also get some kind of an engagement with those particular communities? Because for me, they are a priority in as far as flattening the curve, because if we look at our stats at this particular point, majority of the numbers are coming from these areas. And we also need to ensure that we fashion some kind of a targeted intervention as this ad hoc to say how, from a legislative point of view, how are we oversighting and supporting the work that is being done? Because in some of the communities, there are even areas or communities that are actually working with our provincial government in trying to flatten the curve in as far as the different substructures or sub-districts, especially in the metro. And I think Witzenberg is another one. So I'm just saying maybe we do need to find also a mechanism that we will also put on the spot as we're doing in general in terms of departments. I think the work that is being done on the hotspot, so that also that work is not just lost, in the process in terms of our oversight. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Honourable Marais, is that your hand again? No. Honourable Dugmore?
Chair, no, I think, sorry, when you finish speaking, the reality is that your hand remains as if it still wants to speak again, but I did not intend to raise my hand again, but
Okay,
I thought that it would automatically disappear.
No, unfortunately, you have to lower your hand manually. All right. Okay. So there have been quite a lot of suggestions.
Okay, I'm lowering my hand. I'm lowering my hand.
Thank you very much for that. Honourable Marais, we have had the Premier brief us twice already. So if you'd like to make a proposal that we ask for a written report on the regulations and this in relation to the court judgment, please would you make that proposal? Otherwise, if you'd like to submit it in writing, then we will include it in that meeting on the regulations that we'll be having in 2 weeks' time. Same for other proposals for things that we need to look at that are outside of the public participation part, but in respect of the work of the committee. As always, you're welcome to send those in writing, and we will include them in the program so that we can look at those important matters. And we can either ask for a briefing or otherwise ask for reports in writing. Okay, if that is then that, if we can then move on to our minutes. Let me just find my notes here. All right, so we have two sets of minutes, the 20th and 22nd of May. If I could hand over to the procedural officer, thank you very much. The first is the minutes of the 20th of May, which was on the theme of transport and public infrastructure, as well as human settlements. If members would please just check their attendance. Okay, right, moving on. Departmental officials. Okay, and then point 1, welcome and introduction. Then 2, briefing on transport and public works. Are there any edits or amendments to page 1 or page 2? None. Moving on to page 3. Briefing by Human Settlements, deliberation of the committee, consideration and adoption of draft committee minutes. Okay. Any edits or amendments to page 3? May we adopt? Could I have a proposer, please?
Chairperson Deirdre Bartman, I propose to adopt.
Thank you very much, Honourable Bartman.
Chairperson Gillian Postman, seconding that adoption.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The minutes are then adopted. We then move on to the minutes of the 22nd of May. Thank you very much. If I could ask that we just add in the theme to the top of the minutes. Okay, and then let's look at attendance. Okay. Are there any edits or amendments to page 1? Okay, moving on to page 2. Who was in attendance? We can move. Okay, any edits made to page 2? Okay, then we move on to page 3, welcome. Briefing by Provincial Treasury and the Provincial Minister of Finance. Then the briefing by the Premier and Provincial Treasury. Then here are some resolutions and actions. The committee requested that the Provincial Treasury provide the committee with the following information: an updated presentation that clarifies the costs associated with PPE, and in respect of PPE procured, more detailed information on the companies providing it. And then again, in terms of PPE procurement for schools, there's a question on that. These are all inputs that were provided by members post the meeting. Moving down to the next page. Report on SMMEs. Then there's some specific questions on the slides on the tourism sector, hairdressing sector, informal sector as well, and then the value of loss to the economy. Then moving down, just one moment. We can move down to 4.2, a resolution that any additional questions or requests for information were to be submitted by a particular date and time, which they were, and that have then been included in here. Honourable Bosman, was that you? Are there any edits or amendments?
Yes, I just wanted to ask point 4.1.5. I'm just wanting to ask, is there a specific reason why the T in the is in parentheses and brackets, as well as the T in tourism, or is that just a typo?
I think in the presentation, the T is a capital, but for the purposes of the sentence, it's been changed to lowercase, and so because it's been changed from the original, it's in brackets.
Okay, perfectly, I understand.
Just to reflect that we've edited the letter. The letter T, just to be specific. All right. Yes, are there any edits or amendments to the minutes aside from including in the heading which theme we were deliberating on? Are there any other edits or amendments?
No, Chairperson, I move for adoption.
Can we adopt with that one amendment?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Honourable Bosman.
Deirdre Bartman, Chairperson. I second the adoption with the amendment.
Thank you very much, Honourable Bartman. The minutes then are adopted with one amendment. All right, then I think that then concludes the meeting. We will see you all next week in our usual slot, where we will be briefed by the Department of Health. If we just hold on one moment, please. My apologies. All right, thank you very much, members, for your participation. I'm glad that we were able to agree and sort of set our program for public participation. We will see you all next week. Stay safe and have a good afternoon. The meeting is adjourned.